I clutched the poppet like my life depended on it. The smooth silicone was slipping out of my fingers, but I still held onto it as hard as I could. The boy who was pulling on the other side of the toy looked like he was about to cry, but I didn't care. In one sharp movement, I snatched the toy out of his hands and ran as fast as I could to the cash register. I didn't even turn around when I heard the boy start to cry behind me, and I just kept pressing the dream toy to my chest. My precious. Hi, my name is Cassie, and I'm 16 years old, and I can't wait to finally become an adult. I don't know why, but for as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to look older than I really was. I didn't see anything terrible about it until this story took place. I dreamed of getting into the coolest college in the country. My grades had to be perfect for that, so I literally shook with nerves before each test. I was so worried that it was hard for me to concentrate. I was barely hanging on. I tried to breathe deeply, closing my eyes and counting to 10, because at the same time, I felt terribly afraid that because of my nerves, I would one day make mistakes on my tests. And you know what? Thoughts like that only made me more worried. Some people might find the whole situation funny, but I wasn't amused at all. I was standing in front of the class before yet another important test, nervously shifting from foot to foot, when I suddenly noticed one of my classmates holding a strange, colorful object. I wasn't the only one who grew interested in it. Bradley was standing there, pressing the bubbles in, and gradually, he attracted a whole crowd. Guys were pushing each other and trying to ask questions. Everyone wanted to have a turn with that cool thing. Still extremely nervous, I cautiously moved, trying to get a better view of the toy. I was really curious, but I didn't want to ask what it was, because I thought it would sound stupid. Luckily, someone else in the crowd asked the question for me. Bradley said it was a poppet toy, designed to help fight stress. He also said that he'd been pushing the bubbles in for 10 minutes, and he wasn't even slightly worried about the test. That's just crazy, I thought. He'd brought some kindergarten toy to convince himself it was helping him. I thought the others would have the same reaction as me, but to my surprise, there was only a look of admiration in the eyes of everyone looking at the poppet. I gave my classmates a mocking look and moved away from them. I wasn't going to get involved in childish nonsense. I was quite capable of coping with stress without some colorful trash. Of course, I got the highest score for the exam, but you know what I thought was strange? Bradley's score was almost as high as mine, even though he'd never been an excellent student. When I got to school the next day, Bradley wasn't the only one holding a poppet. Another classmate of ours brought a similar toy. And once again, a whole crowd formed around her. You should have seen their greedy eyes as they lined up to play with it. And once again, I looked on with mockery. After that day, life at school started to change very quickly. Just a week later, every other student was walking around with a poppet. During the breaks, they traded them in small groups. Those who had no money for a toy brought all sorts of sweets to school to eventually exchange them. It seemed like everyone at school was obsessed with that stupid toy. And the more people around me grew interested in it, the more uncompromising I became. Let them all buy dozens of toys. I didn't care at all. I didn't need an anti-stress toy. I could deal with my nerves perfectly well, even though it was getting harder to do by the day. I couldn't stop thinking about the final exams. It seemed like all I did was read books, memorize formulas, and solve math problems. When I went to bed, I would be so stressed out, I wouldn't be able to fall asleep for hours. And even when I finally managed to doze off, I'd be solving geometry problems in my dreams. Long story short, sometimes I felt like I was truly losing my mind. I was sitting in the classroom, feeling incredibly tired before yet another practice test. I'd gone to bed very late the night before, because I'd been preparing for it, and I hadn't managed to fall asleep for most of the night. My classmates were trying to relax during the break, and, well, I decided to check the formulas one last time. Everything would have been fine, but my attention was caught by a poppet left unattended on the table by one of my classmates. It was like it was hypnotizing me. I tried so hard to read the textbook. My eyes kept getting drawn to the toy like a magnet. I remember clenching my fists as hard as I could. No, Cassie, you don't need some poppet. Stop it, I thought. But the problem was, I had actually been really curious about those toys for a long time. My classmates were so crazy about them. I couldn't help but want to touch one of them too. But it was so hard for me to admit that to myself, let alone to my friends. I couldn't help myself any longer. After looking around, I realized that this was the perfect chance. I was the only one in the class, and the bell would ring in 5 minutes. I couldn't resist. I carefully picked up the poppet as if I was afraid it would bite me. And gently, I pushed one bubble in, and then another. At first, nothing seemed to be happening. However, before I knew it, I couldn't stop. The material was so pleasant to the touch. And when I pressed on the bubbles, it felt like my nerves that had been stretched, taut for so long were finally loosening up. The remaining minutes of the break flew by in an instant, and I didn't want to let the poppet out of my hands at all, so it was only by some miracle that I managed to put it back in its place in time. And you know what? You would never believe it. I had never nailed a test of the problems. And in the end, I even handed in my test 5 minutes earlier than usual. Could poppets really work? Just 5 minutes had been enough to make me feel so much better. To my shame, the very next evening, I begged my mom for money to go to the store. I felt like a criminal, constantly looking around and feeling afraid that one of my classmates would catch me buying the toy. But luckily, everything went well. I couldn't let go of it the whole night. I played with it while reading a book. I pressed the bubbles while eating my dinner. Even in the bathroom, I brushed my teeth with one hand while pushing the bubbles in with the other. It was like a dam had broke inside of me, and I couldn't stop. I went to bed with it, of course, and then something amazing happened. For the first time in months, I fell asleep almost immediately. I didn't wake up even once during the night. I slept so peacefully, and in the morning, I felt refreshed and well-rested. This was some kind of magic. The toy helped me so much that I decided I was not going to stop at just buying one. I went to the store and bought a few of other colors. And then I opened an online store and I got lost. There was every kind of poppet you could think of there. Shaped like a unicorn head, an Among Us character, glowing, huge, small, and I really needed them all. A few days later, my room was filled with them. Things were not great at school. I really wanted to show off my collection, discuss the toys with my classmates, maybe even trade some of them. But I couldn't get over my pride, so I kept turning my nose up and saying it was all childish nonsense. One day, I found out there was a rare, extremely expensive poppet I'd long dreamed of buying at the store. And of course, as soon as the classes ended, I hurried there, but the poppets I wanted had already been sold out. It turned out that I wasn't the only one who was waiting for that collection. Feeling upset, I started to wander around the store when I suddenly noticed the poppet I wanted! The last one! Someone had thrown it onto a soft toy counter. And of course, I ran towards it, my arms outstretched. But when I grabbed it, some boy did at the same time. He tried to snatch the toy out of my hands and said that he had long wanted a poppet like that. I remember arguing with him for a few minutes about who had noticed the toy first before I finally managed to snatch it out of his hands. The toy was mine, and I was so happy about it. The next day, I was telling my classmates as usual, all of these poppets of yours are utter nonsense. Normal people don't need them to relax. And then I turned around and saw him, that boy. You should have seen how angrily he looked at me. It turns out that he was a younger student at my school. What a coincidence. Oh, I felt so scared. If my lies were revealed, all of my classmates would laugh at me. I immediately took the boy aside and I begged him not to tell anyone anything. But Evan, that was his name, was more cunning than his silence. No chance in hell. He wasn't going to get it that easily. I suggested a trade. We met after school and drew a table. Reluctantly, I put my rare poppet Evan wanted so badly on my side. But I'd been dreaming about it for so long that all of Evan's offers didn't seem good enough. He first presented his rainbow poppet, then offered me a few more glowing ones, and I told him what he needed to add. Then he took candies out of his bag, but that still wasn't enough for me. We bargained for perhaps half an hour. My new friend was ready to offer me his entire school bag, but it still wasn't good enough. Finally, Evan said, "I'll give you my PlayStation 5. How? That was a real sacrifice. Of course, I immediately agreed to such an offer. I didn't want to give away the rare toy, but the console was worth it. Terribly pleased, I set it up, downloaded a couple games, but I didn't really have any time to enjoy playing them. A couple of days after that, Evan showed up on my doorstep in tears. It turned out he hadn't asked his parents for permission before giving away his console. And when they found out what he'd traded their expensive gift for, they had been furious, of course. Hell, I had been right to suspect some kind of trickery. He was really very stupid to trade a piece of silicone for such an expensive thing. But no one had forced Evan to. It was my console now. I struggled with my conscience for a few minutes before finally giving up. Deep inside, I felt quite sorry for the guy because he'd already been severely scolded by his parents already. Of course, I gave him the console back, and to cheer him up a little, I offered to give him my rare Poppet for a few days. And you should have seen how happy he was. Looking at Evan in that moment, I smiled. After a while, we became good friends. Finally, I could discuss Poppets with someone other than my classmates without feeling embarrassed or ashamed of myself. Tell me, have you tried out this toy yet? If so, share your impressions in the comments down below. As for me, well, I think I'll go play with my Poppet some more.